Another example of waterfalls is the Angel Falls. This is located in Venezuela in South America. Do you observe that how the water is coming down and how a rainbow is formed due to the reflection of sun rays on the water crystals? Victoria Falls is another example of waterfalls which is located in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, in Africa. Work of river. As a river flows, we have studied that it creates erosion and deposition of soil, but it also forms an oxbow. Now we will study what is an oxbow. So as a river enters a plain, it twists and turns. The river, it never flows in a straight way. There are turns and twists. These bends are known as meanders. Due to continuous erosion and deposition of soil along the sides of a meander. So, for example, if a river is flowing from these mountains and it is flowing, so it is never in a straight form. It is in a form of a twist and turns. These twists and turns are known as meanders. The forming of large bends are known as meanders. So, this bend is known as a meander. Now, due to continuous erosion of soil and deposition at the sides of a meander, for example, the material of or the eroded soil also settles here in the sides of meanders. So, these end, they form meander loops and they come closer and closer. So, once a large meander may become a closed meander. It is due to course of time and the meander loop. It cuts off and the river forms a cut-off lake. This lake is known as an oxbow lake. For example, if a lot of sediments are being formed or being deposited here, soon this part of river will get detached from the lake, from the river, and it will form a lake itself. Now, here is an example of an oxbow lake. Do you see that a lot of twists and turns are there, and soon, for example, if this part of the river, it cuts itself from the river due to the process of sedimentation and due to the process of deposition. This is known as an oxbow lake. Now let's talk about a formation of a flood plain. How are flood plains formed? So, the deposition on the landforms are known as flood plains. So, at times a river, when it overflows a banks, overflows the side of the rivers, it leads to flooding of that particular area. As it floods, there are deposits or layers of soil and other materials such as stones, gravel, which are left on the banks of the river. So, as you see here, the level of water rises and all this material such as gravel, stone, soil, this gets deposited here on the land. And as soon as the flooding ends, the material still rests on the surface of the land. This results in formation of flood plains. A new layer on top of this, a flood plain, a plain layer is formed. This is a flood plain. As we talked about an oxbow lake and flood plains, as you see that these are the small gravel, small piece of sediments which are left by the river which is flowing through, and a lake is formed which is separated from the river. This form of lake is known as an oxbow lake. And the plains which are further formed due to a flooding river are known as flood plains. Do you know some example of flood plains which lie in India? The plains along the Ganga river and the Yamuna river are known as flood plains because they were formed due to the long process of flooding in these rivers. Now, let's talk about formation of a delta. So, what is a delta? As the river approaches the sea, the river it starts from a glacier in the mountains and it flows throughout plains, plateaus, and finally it mixes with the sea. The speed of the flowing water, it decreases gradually. The river, it starts to break up into number of streams, and these streams are called as distributaries. So, small number of streams which are formed when a river is mixing up or is approaching the sea, they are known as distributaries. The river, the speed of the river or the flowing water, it becomes slower and slower, and it carries a lot of deposits with it. Why does the speed become slow? Because there are a number of materials apart from flowing water known as deposits in it. Each distributary forms its own mouth. Each distributary forms its own mouth where it is meeting with the sea. The collection of sediments from all the mouths form a delta. So, when all the material and the sediments which are flowing in these distributaries, they became settlements or they get deposit in a place, this place is known as a delta. Here is an image of showing that how different distributaries are formed. There is a main river which is coming from the mainland, as you see here, and then there are small channels of this river. These are known as distributaries, and each distributary has its mouth. So this place from where these channels gets separated, these are known as mouths of distributary. This is formed because of the formation, because of the deposition of the sediments that the river was carrying. And this area which is formed between two distributaries is known as a delta. Now let's talk about work of sea waves. The erosion and deposition of the sea waves gives rise to coastal landforms. Have you observed Western Ghats and the western coast as well as the Eastern Ghats? How are they formed? There is no river so that the settlements would be formed. They were formed because of the erosion that was caused by sea waves. Sea waves, they continuously approach and strike the rocks of the land around the sea. These rocks, they further gets distributed or broken down and they form plain layers or rough surfaces, and they start to settle down, get deposited. Over a time, they become longer and larger in size. Thus, a hollow cave-like structure is sometimes formed on rocks, and they are called as sea caves. So, as you observe here, there is a sea and there are large rocks. As the sea waves, they touch these rocks, over a period of time, these rocks are cut at some places where the waves approach mostly with a lot of force. They are known as sea arcs, and sometimes even a cave is formed. This is known as a sea cave. Now, as these cavities, they become bigger and bigger, only the roof of the cave remains, thus forming sea arch. Erosions, they break the roof and only walls are left. So, there may be times that the whole rock is separated from the cave and only a wall is left. These they like features are called stacks. The steep rocky coast rising almost vertically above sea water is called a sea cliff. So, as you observe that there is an arc which is formed by the sea wave and the erosion caused by them, the surface or the landmass above it is known as a sea cliff. The sea waves, they deposit the sediments along the shores, forming beaches. Now, here are some examples of sea caves. So, these are formed, as you observe, due to the erosion which was caused by sea water and waves. Now let's talk about work of ice. So, ice on the planet Earth is mostly in the form of glaciers, and glaciers, they are nothing but frozen rivers. They also erode a huge amount of landscape by bulldozing soil and stones, and they expose these when the solid rock is below. Glaciers, when they move, they carve deep hollows. As the ice melts, they get filled up with water and they become beautiful lakes in the mountains. They are also known as lagoons. So, the materials which is carried by the glaciers, such as big and small rocks, sand, silts, it gets deposited at one place along the shore of the river. These deposits, they form glacial moraines. In their way, glaciers, they carry materials such as rocks, stones, silt, sand, soil, and it deposits them. It deposits these places. It results in formation of glacier moraines. Now let's talk about work of wind. Wind is one of the major factors for erosion and deposition of soil as well as formation of major landforms. It is an active agent for erosion and deposition mainly in desert regions, because in desert region the soil, the sand is very dry and it is very light, so it can be carried easily away by the wind. Sometimes in deserts you see rocks such as this, which are in the shape of a mushroom. Don't you think this rock is in a shape of mushroom? The top is bigger and the bottom is very steep. These are known as mushroom rocks and they are formed because of the work of the wind. The wind erodes the lower section because it is where the wind hits the rock hardest, whereas the upper section is more wider in nature. Therefore, such rocks have a narrow bottom, a narrow base and a wider top. When the wind blows, it lifts and transports sand from one place to another, and this gives rise to sand dunes. As you see, we always talk about that sand dunes, they shift from one place to another. But why does it happen? Why do sand dunes shift from one place to another? Because of the movement of wind. When a very strong wind blows in a desert area, it takes away, it erodes with itself the tiny sand granules. So this happens in very large quantity and then they shift to one place. When it stops blowing, the sand falls and gets deposited in a low hill like structures. These structures are therefore called as sand dunes. The grains of sand are very light and fine in nature and the wind can carry them for very long time. When such sand is deposited in large areas, it is called as loess. Large deposits of loess in sand dunes are found in China. Now, what have we learnt in this chapter so far? We began with learning about volcanoes. How are volcanoes formed? We learnt about the plate tectonics, the lithospheric plates that may result in formation of new landforms such as mountains, volcanoes. These are also the reasons for earthquake and landslides. We also learnt in this chapter about different kind of landforms and how are they formed with the movement of river, sea waves, wind and glaciers. So I hope you understood everything in this chapter. Thank you.